fucking cold. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Barrel Vision Spotlight. This week we're talking about everyone's favourite coward, Scout. Yeah, me and Tyler have said some harsh things about Scout while the channel's been a thing. And I want to say that it's earned, in my opinion, but exaggerated. And I might be able to explain why, but once again, it will become clearer when we get more into certain things. Specifically the boomstick, that would be fun. Because we really don't like the boomstick, and I still don't. I've used it recently, and I don't like it. I don't think it's a good weapon, but we'll get into it. Scout is one of the most popular classes. I don't like saying one of the most popular or one of the least popular when it comes to only 4 variables, you know. There's only 4 classes. Saying he's one of the most popular, what does that mean? It's like 2 of the most popular, and the other 2 are the least popular. Anyway, Scout, he's basically, I say he's one of the most popular because he is essentially the mascot of the game. I mean, look at this. That's the game logo, basically, what you're seeing there. But it's actually just a Scout logo. Scout is defined by mobility, applying status effects, crowd control, but specifically not crowd clearing, as well as precision single target damage, which is where his range comes into play. So let's talk about range, which is customary now. Scout is probably the longest range class in general. Even with something like the Drac, it can still be used effectively at long range, especially if you take the velocity upgrade. But the other 2, well, actually, even the Zukovs have an inherent weak point multiplier. It's sort of baked into Scout's DNA. Precision is, and there's things like the Drac sort of are there to break the mold almost, even though they're still good at long ranges, and better when used against weak points, obviously. But Scout is long range in a lot of senses of the word, and I spoke that he's very movement focused as well, but this plays into the long range aspect in that Scout is very focused on positioning, as in you position yourself oftentimes away from danger, so you are at a correct range, a safe range from which you can act and help your team, because where Scout shines is taking out high priority targets in a quick manner. Ideally, it's usually not as quick as you'd like, or it never seems to be for me, but that's sort of the point of Scout, because it's really the thing he does best. I'd argue that Gunner can arguably do, well, Gunner can do more single target damage than anyone. Any of them can if you want them to, but Scout is the most consistent, decent, good, precise single target DPS, which entails limited mobility. No, not mobility, sorry. Limited area of effect. I was meant to pause the recording there. I mean, I did, but I did it late. Sorry about that. But yeah, crowd clearing, or that clear of, Scout really doesn't have any explosive options. It really doesn't. The only real, well, there are options sort of scattered throughout Scout for actual crowd clearing damage. You know, the Drac has plasma splash, it has aggressive venting and impact deflection. There's a bit of, the boomstick has a little bit of it by default with the blast wave. The crossbow has some decent crowd clearing options, but in general, it's the thing Scout is the worst at doing. It's the thing he's worst at amongst all the classes. The thing that he's best at is precision. But it's not his only pillar. The other pillar is movement, and really the thing that I think most people find attractive about Scout. I like both aspects. I know that Tyler, it's really the movement for him. You know, the grappling hook is awesome, and Scout has a lot of mobility focused upgrades. I think every weapon has something, and I can probably list them off. The GK2 has Battle Frenzy, the M1000 has Hover Clock, the Drac has Hot Feet, the Boomstick has Special Powder, the Zukovs have Battle Frenzy as well. Actually no, Zukovs have something else where it's after you reload, you move faster. I don't know what it's called, but the crossbow has Battle Frenzy. And it all sort of culminates, you combine that with the fact that you've always got an infinite ammo, highly effective traversal tool. Mobility and speed are one of Scout's greatest strengths. And the reason he is, even though his weapons might seem weaker than everyone else's, the reason he's able to be the a high single target precision class, essentially the VIP target killer, is because he's able to stay, ideally, a good scout will be able to stay very safe and very easily get to positions from where they can lay down high single target damage. But the movement focus doesn't stop at the scout himself, it also applies to the enemies. I'd say when it comes to scout has a higher focus on crowd control than crowd clearing, which is something I said a few minutes ago. Now, while he obviously focuses on single target damage, there's a lot of status effects going on for Scout, and they're all pretty much all focused around slowdown or immobilising targets, the only exception being where fire is employed. But even then, sometimes, you know, I hope that can't be heard. The earphone's scratching against my zipper. So yeah, slowdown effects is a big thing that Scout does. He sort of controls the speed of combat on both ends, making himself faster or making the enemy slower. The GK2, pretty much every weapon has some kind of stun or fear. GK2 is stun, and you can also use electrifying reload. N1000 has fear and stun, and has electrifying focus shots. The Drak can have electrocution on it as a mod, and you can also use aggressive venting, which fears enemies. The Boomstick has fear and stun. The Zukovs have... Zukovs actually less so, but they do have cryo minelets, which is a very effective crowd immobilization tool. A similar situation for the crossbow, which also has cryo bolts, but at the same time all the special bolts apply some kind of immobilization or slowdown effect. Same with the grenades, all apply slowdown or immobilization. And this is when we need to face the question of Scout being potentially weaker than the other classes. And when it comes to raw firepower, he is, but he's meant to make up for that for mobility and slowdown effects, and he does, but you still feel it. You still recognise the fact that you are not putting out as much, you are not as hard hitting as everyone else. You know, Engineer and Driller can take a bit of time, but overall they're doing a lot more damage than the Scout is. So yeah, he makes up for it in other ways. And another way that two other ways he further makes up for it, sort of spin off from the mobility thing, and from the flares actually, because the flares shouldn't be ignored. Scout's, as we can see, his support tool is the flare gun, which to me is the worst support tool. I think this is not hard to argue actually, as in you could argue against it. Something like the satchel charge potentially being more useless for the class. But in general, I don't find myself, you know, eager to have these flares around. I don't miss them, but they are useful still. But what I'm really talking about is Scout's role as a medic and as a, quote, mission doer, right? So medic, obviously, this comes from his mobility. He's extremely quick, which means he can get to down teammates quicker. He's not so much meant to keep the, you know, defender team like a gunner is, or an engineer is. He's meant to get them back up once they've gone down, because he can get to them wherever they are quickly, or a good scout can. He's also not terrible at dealing with whatever may be on someone's corpse. Player corpses tend to attract a lot of enemies, and it can be difficult if you don't have a quick way of taking out those enemies to revive, because you can get hit by them still, which makes it dangerous. But with, you know, things like cryo grenades and the ability to use pheromones and whatnot, and aggressive fear effects, Scout can clear the way for revives quite easily, and do it fairly well. You know, a cryo grenade or a pheromone grenade will render the area safe. Obviously, if you're being chased by enemies already, you might want to deal with those, but the enemies on a teammate's body, you could deal with those in a number of ways as Scout, and render them non-problem. Negate the problem that they present, I suppose. Now, I used quotes to describe Scout as a mission doer. This is one of his great strengths, though, and I think a lot of people will know what I mean when I say mission doer, is that he's much better than everyone else at just getting the mission done quick, especially secondary objectives. But you can sort of go through every mission and be like, Morkite, mining expedition, especially when you have a good engineer. Scouts can be mining the most Morkite. Egg hunt's not. Maybe he's not that crazy. You know, you can get eggs like on ceilings and on walls quite often, so he can be good for that. But there's only at most 8 of them. Point extraction, he's fantastic. I'd argue better than Driller. Because you can just find the quarks so quickly and so easily. A combination to grab and hooks and flares. It's so quick. Other missions. Salvage op, a bit of a weakness there, right? So, actually, we'll talk about the weakness towards the end. For salvage op and escort duty, and maybe even a little bit of industrial sabotage, but I'll save that. But Illumination's got good single target damage and slowdown effects, which are very useful against dreadnoughts. On site refining, he can very quickly get 2 leaks on the pipelines. He can very quickly find the liquid morkite wells as soon as you come out the drop pod. He's, like I said, fantastic at every secondary objective, I would say. He can chase after festive fleas much easier than everyone else. He can just get things, especially the flares. The flares are actually really useful for that stuff. As well as just getting more nitra and whatnot for the team. It's just fantastic, really. But I want to mention the overall weaknesses, and it does come down to crowd control, because you'd think that with his slowdown effects, he'd be pretty good at things like salvage op and escort duty, and in some ways he is. You know, slowing down groups of enemies, controlling the flow of combat is good, but especially when you're on your own, Scout becomes easily the worst class to play on missions like salvage operation and escort duty, because he cannot do defense in a fixed position on his own. The slowdown effects still play their part, but when you're softening enemies up, but you don't have any teammates to take advantage of that, suddenly you realise the gap. Do you notice that the light just went out? I don't really want to reveal what I'm using as lighting. There you go, it's back. I don't look good. I don't have a proper lighting setup. It's just, you know. But yeah, it's when you play solo that you begin to see the cracks in Scout's armour, and you see what really not so much brings him down, but he is worse at solo games, in my opinion, than the others, and I think he's objectively worse at salvage operation and escort duty. Because while Scout can kill lots of enemies, he can't do it quickly, nowhere near as quickly as anyone else, and that presents itself to be a problem when you have to do that quickly to keep, say, Doretta alive, or keep enemies away from the uplink so that you don't die in it and then fail the mission. So I feel like I've quite briskly gone over a lot of the gameplay aspects of Scout, so Identity comes next. Like I said, the typical Scout, as we can see here, is... I think I did this before. There you go. He's basically the mascot, you know, everyone knows what the default Scout looks like. Everyone kind of thinks that this might be Carl. I don't know if I believe that. It is the central statue in the Memorial Hall, to be fair. But whatever. In general, the community has, I feel like, a weird opinion on Scouts, as in they're probably one of the only classes, or probably the only class that really gets a lot of inherent flack. You do often see complaints about incompetent Scouts sort of killing themselves through fall damage, or not using their flare gun properly, and it's a bit of a shame that that's sort of the reputation that Scouts have, when I think they could be so much better. I do think it is the weakest in quotes. Scouts have still Scouts still have the potential to do fantastic things in combat, and have the potential to revive more responsibly than anyone else, and gather minerals much quicker, get the mission done much quicker than anyone else. But when it comes to raw combat, he is the weakest. It's kind of a fact. You just have to accept it, but it doesn't deflate his value. but I think maybe it biases certain people towards pointing out sort of the funny shortcomings of Scout, like them often dying from full damage because they're not that impressive in combat, so it's easy to focus on the silly slip-ups that a lot of Scout players make. A lot of the Scout players I play with. Hope you didn't hear that. You know, I see it a lot in Scout players. I kind of do the same thing as well. I die from full damage a lot of Scout, but only because I foolishly attempt to get minerals that I don't have a platform for, and I just keep taking full damage, and it's a definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Anyway, so yeah, that's Scout. That's pretty much all there is to say about Scout in general. I mean, I did go into a little bit more detail. I sort of pointed out sort of you know, crowd control effects and electricity effects on the different weapons and whatnot. But I can get even more in detail, and I will do. So next episode will be the Warthog. When we start getting to things like overclocks, I'm going to probably be using gameplay, and it will be formatted more like that, as I'll be playing with the thing in question, and then sort of giving thoughts on it afterwards. Let me know if you want that for the weapons themselves, because in the the Warthog video, what that will be is going over the Warthog in detail, and then I will do overclocks on their own, a whole video on an overclock. I play a mission with it and then I review it, a bit like what Snowing Fate does, but this series is already surrounded in these more analytical discussions, so I don't think I really would be labelled as a copycat. I mean, you could call me a copycat for that, though. We'll see when I start making those ones specifically. But actually, I think as it stands for the just the Warthog spotlight, nothing else about it, just the Warthog generalised, that won't use gameplay. But I think the tier 5 mod videos will, and that means I have to split those in two, as well as all the overclock ones, which means I can keep doing this series forever, pretty much, which is lovely. Anyway, I'll see you on Sunday with the Warthog. Alright. Oh, what's a Scout quote? Perfect. Yeah, I don't so much a Scout as make this operation possible.